Hello and welcome. Deep strikes into the territory of Russia. The situation around Bakhmut is absolutely critical and the encirclement seems to be about to happen, as well as is Russia running out of tanks. This and more in this situation report. There were strikes into several regions deep into Russia. We see videos here of fires burning, of damages that were done. We see fire here. The strikes seem to have targeted the Russian infrastructure. Here we see one strike that was in Tuapse, which is down the Black Sea coast south of Krasnodar. But there were also strikes in around Belgorod. There were strikes here close to in Adygea, in the Adygea Republic. There were the flights out of St. Petersburg were stopped, probably because of Ukrainian air activity, and really close to Moscow, a drone was found that either crashed or was shot down. These strikes seem to, as said, have targeted the infrastructure. We have pictures here, for instance, from the Black Sea port in, Tuapse, where you can see the damage that was done. It hit the gas infrastructure and oil infrastructure there, damaging it and doing serious damage. Some Z accounts, so basically pro-Russian accounts, are saying that that Israeli drones have been involved in this. They take this as an example, taking this company here that supposedly was involved. But the issue is that the company, this is supposed to be one of the drones. At least here it says its range is limited to 200 kilometers line of sight. So unless we expect a Ukrainian second drone flying somewhere close and switching the, let's quickly change this, and guiding the missile into the target down here, it seems highly unlikely that at least this type of drone was used in this regard. When it comes to the battles along the front line, by the way, a lot of reports of shelling along the border happening almost every week. I have just read a couple of new ones, so border towns are still being shelled, in case you wondered whether those the international border here is now suddenly without activity just because the Russians have withdrawn. No, they keep firing on the towns here. When it comes to the eastern front north of the Siversky Donetsk, I cannot confirm any significant changes in control. Some activity close to Novovodyane. The Russians have gained some ground there, but at which point is unclear. So it might have been a week ago or something. But in overall, there is no confirmed further advances by the Russians in the last few days. South of the Siversky Donetsk, the heavy fighting is continuing. Also here, the advances concentrate themselves on the area of Bakhmut. Russians are advancing inside of Bakhmut itself. In several areas of the city, they have gained some ground, but the most critical thing is that they're closing in on Khomove, which is down here. Even according to several accounts, according to them, they are by now 1.6 kilometers away from it. And if we can see this, these two are the two paved roads out of Bakhmut into Ukrainian-held territory, and in both of those, the Russians are now really close. Usually you would expect in a viewing distance, so they should be able to shell it, should be able to do fire control over the areas. That doesn't mean that there aren't some dirt tracks, some dirt roads in these area where the Ukrainians can still drive through, where they can still use it. But at least when it comes to paved roads, those two are the only ones left, and the northern one is now heavily under threat and by any means, by any reports, not far from being cut off. There are some rumors, though, which are unclear to what degree the situation right now is. And we see here, this is from a telephone call that was in an interview with Prigozhin, and he's saying they are bringing in new reserves. He claimed that the Ukrainians are not giving up Bakhmut, but they are withdrawing, and there are some reports from foreign volunteers, for instance. James Vasquez, for instance, mentioned that he's getting deployed to the most dangerous point of this war right now, which is right now is Bakhmut. So you would expect that his unit is being sent there. There are some rumors that the Ukrainians are sending reinforcements, but at the same time, we see videos like this, supposedly of Ukrainians withdrawing from Bakhmut. We see it here on a dirt road. They are driving out on top of a infantry fighting vehicle. So what the situation right now is cannot be confirmed. We see the mud sprayed, how mud sprayed they are. The situation right now is completely unclear. There's simply no way to say whether the Ukrainians, at least I don't find any hard evidence that the Ukrainians are withdrawing or that they are reinforcing it. Rumors are thick from in every direction right now. Clear is that a look on the map seems to be saying that they are about to be cut off. Even though this is a pro-Ukrainian map, I have to say though, this is the biggest advance from the Russians north of Bakhmut that I've found on any map. I like this map because of its features and that it shows topography and things like this. But there are other maps that still show the Russians roughly in this area, so still quite a lot further away from Khomove. Still, Khomove is in the sight of the Russians and they are pushing hard in this direction. This seems to be an appropriate point to actually show you what it means to fight there right now. I have to turn the music of this video to 0 so I don't get copyright issues, and you can actually watch it even if you have a weaker stomach, I think, at least, because you don't see anybody die here and I couldn't identify any corpses, but it shows how brutal the war is and how challenging it is fighting. I'm not completely sure. I think it was said that this is from Bakhmut. I have no way of confirming it, but this is a new video and it shows that how the fighting is currently going on there. You see here a Ukrainian soldiers and you see how much his cover is being hit right in front of it. You see the dirt hitting the dirt. The penetrations where the shells hit. You see somebody here in the background too, and some probably burning piece falling down. This is a BTR-82. It has a 30mm autocannon that he's clearly using against this position. At least that's the indication that this is a video from the same position, from the same event. And you see how heavy this guy is under fire, and he keeps responding. You see him shooting. That seems to have been an indirect fire, maybe a grenade launcher or something like this, and hits behind him just to illustrate what someone like him is facing. And obviously we can see how important here the trees around him burst, and he still seems to be fine. This also shows the importance of fortifications, how trenches are still relevant even today. And at the same time, it could say how important airburst ammunition would be for something like 30mm cannons on this. Because if the Russians had airburst ammo, which is obviously far more expensive, these two guys would probably be in a lot more trouble than they already are in. Now, for me, as said, this in itself doesn't show us much except for showing how grim the fighting is and how challenging it is for the soldiers in an environment like this, both being shelled with heavy caliber as well as autocannons, while just having an earth mount in front of them. The fighting is also continuing around Avdiivka. No confirmations of Russian advances here from my side that I can confirm. And in Marinka, the fighting is also continuing. The Russians are saying they gained some ground inside of the territory, and they claim they penetrated some Ukrainian positions in the direction of Pobieda. I cannot really confirm that yet, but it's possible that the Russians have gained some ground here. Vuhledar, fighting is continuing, but no changes are that can be confirmed. Further on the southern area, the southern front, not much changes. Artillery fire, obviously. This is nothing new. It happens along the whole front line, but the Russians keep shelling along the whole front line. Kherson City, other settlements along the front line. Fortification works is also continuing, both in Zaporizhia as well in Kherson, but there are also reports from the Crimean Peninsula itself, including heavy engineering gear that is brought on the peninsula to establish fortifications on it, indicating that the Russians at least take the threat of a possible Ukrainian invasion in the future serious enough to put some efforts into preventing that. That doesn't mean they are about to go on into the Crimea, but that the Russians think the chance is higher than 0% of the Ukrainians coming to the Crimea at some point. Generally, when it comes to the developments along the front line, we can say the offensive activity in Luhansk seems to be dying down. It's too early to say whether the Russians have reached their culmination point here, but as of now, their offensive seems to stall in a certain degree there, and the intensity of their attacks is going down. We had in the last couple days, we also had reports about Ukrainian counterattacks, which shows us that the dominance isn't fully on the Russian side anymore, as it has been for a couple of weeks before that. But it's too early to say that this is how far the Russians will reach. They might very well still bring in reinforcements. For instance, are there reports that Russian troops have been moved out of Belorussia now and are moving in the Belgorod region so they could get involved in the fighting fairly soon and give the offensive new strength and allow the Russians to gain further ground. The situation around Bakhmut is completely unclear. Clear is that the encirclement is getting closer. As of now, as of the time of the recording, there is no reports that I've found yet that an encirclement actually happened. There are contradicting rumors from both sides that either the Ukrainians are pushing reserves into the defense there, or that they are withdrawing. As of now, I simply can't say it's for certain what exactly is going on here. We also have reports about Russian reinforcements being sent to Zaporizhzhia. It's completely unclear how much of this is true, because it's coming from some sources that are pro-Ukrainian or Ukrainian sources, but not detailed enough to give us a clear indication. But the numbers that are being said are up to 25,000 men that supposedly are being redeployed into Zaporizhzhia region, which would be an indication of the Russians either planning their own offensive there or much more likely preparing for a possible Ukrainian counteroffensive with personnel there. Partisan activity has also there's no new partisan activity, but we have pictures now from the airport near Minsk with the A-50 that was damaged there, that was attacked there, and what can be seen is some discoloring on it. You can see it here, and there is a video showing it here, that the color has changed. Now, this can be scorching from potential fire. This can be due to repainting it. It's simply unclear to which degree this plane has been damaged, but it's clear so far that it was not destroyed in any way. At least that's from what we can see from the satellite pictures. When it comes to the mobilization, Putin has signed a decree that allows foreigners to serve in the Russian armed forces for a contract of 1 year as a non-commissioned officer, or as what is it called? What's below them? Like general personnel, general like grunt, basically. Obviously, signing this right now is kind of risky, as the mobilization is still active at the same time, which means that contracts are not being cancelled after their time is up. So when you sign up for a 1 year contract, you might very well end up several years in the Russian armed forces, as right now the only way out is being captured, deserting, being killed, or being wounded to a degree that you can no longer fight, or maybe reaching an age limit. But that's it for now to leave the military, so the 1 year contract might end up much longer. There's also reports about and additional videos of mobilized personnel in Russia complaining that they are being sent under the command of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic. Those units force them to do frontal assaults with high casualty rates under the threat of being shot if they refuse to attack, they are saying, and they claim that their wounded personnel is not being evacuated because the so-called DNR is only evacuating its own wounded. So if wounded mobilized personnel cannot be walking away from the front line by itself, is basically being left there. These are videos being made by mobilized personnel, we have obviously not really a good way to confirm how much of this is authentic, but the complaints and the videos, if we look in the Russian information sphere, seem to be authentic as of now. There's also a interesting interview here. I think I have it here, an interview with this Russian soldier. Now, the interview is also on YouTube, but the problem here is we have no way of confirming how much of this is true. He could be a Ukrainian for all we know, or somebody making stuff up. There is no way of confirming the authenticity, and he might be given some promised some things if he says what the Ukrainians want him to tell, because what he's saying is so damning for the Russians that it's little suspicious. I have no, as said, unfortunately there's no way of us generally to confirm how much of this was said voluntarily, how much of what he says is true, as it might well be that they say if he says what they want, they allow him to leave the country and to look for asylum in the West, or any deal like this could theoretically be possible. But in the interview he said he's from the 155th Marine Brigade that is currently used here at Vuhledar. He said that by now the Russians are storing deceased personnel in storage facilities to not have to pay out the families for the fact that the personnel has died. He claims that the brigade was refreshed over the course of the last year with 6,800 men, which roughly would equate the six times the strength, the nominal strength of the brigade. So basically it has been completely wiped out more than 6 times as of now. He said in technical terms, he claims that it was rebuilt 7 to 8 times. By now, that's no longer a naval brigade, but the personnel is made up of volunteers, of mobilized personnel, of convicts, and of sailors that were taken off ships in the Pacific Fleet. I said no way of confirming that. If it was true, it would obviously shine a damning light on the Russian capabilities to continue waging this war if they have to switch to this personnel, and even personnel from ships that are specifically trained for a completely different task to make up for naval brigades. And it would also show how high the losses might have been. But I said, unfortunately, no way of confirming it. And here, for instance, a nice example why you should not directly believe what the media tells you in the headline. The insider is saying the Russians can now, the only tank factory, that should be Ural Vagonzavod, can only build 20 tanks a month, and it's the losses are 10 times as high. If you continue reading the article, though, it says what might be my first suspicion when I read this, that we are talking about fresh production, so tanks that roll off the assembly lines that have not existed prior to being produced. It's not talking about repairs or activation of stored tanks. As most of you will know, officially Russia reported that they have over 10,000 tanks in storage at the beginning of the war, and they only had to report what's west of the Urals. So east of the Urals, there might be tens of thousands, at least in theory, rotting somewhere in the fields. A lot of it will be, there might even be T-55s standing around somewhere. But when it comes to the pure material strengths that was reported, we were talking about 10,000. Now, obviously, a small part of this will be close to being operational, and others will be little more than a rusting hulk, maybe even with essential parts being stolen out and sold for scrap or something like this. But in theory, at least, the tanks that were available to be activated were 10,000, and we are only talking about main battle tanks, not about IFVs or anything like this. And in the article later, they also say that right now 18 factories are actually working to restore stored tanks, and 2 more of those factories are expected to go operational really soon, which would mean 20 factories just working on restoring fresh tanks. So if you see the conclusion, or if you just read the headline here and see that they lose 10 times as much as they produce, that might be close to the truth, but it is not including the 10,000 tanks that in theory can be activated to make up for those losses. So the situation for Russia will be somewhat less dramatic than initially said. Still, though, there are some reports from Ukrainian soldiers that supposedly some manual fell into the hands of them, explaining how the doctrine is changing now. And according to this, tanks will now no longer do real combined arms operations where they accompany soldiers into assaults, but they are supposed to stay back and give fire support, basically let the infantry advance with the tanks significantly behind them, obviously to save tanks, to have lower losses, which would be an indication that the Russians, while they might have a lot on storage, while they might put an effort up to get those stored tanks operational, they are still losing so many that they are running short on it, at least in comparison to the size increase of the forces, which is obviously another factor. They invaded with roughly 200,000, and by now we are talking about a potential army of 300,000 to 400,000. So they need more tanks. Even if they hadn't lost a single one, they would still need probably 1,000 to 2,000 additional tanks on top of this. So all of this is shows that Russia has trouble producing the losses, but the trouble it might have replacing them are far less than it sees on the first on the first view. But still, we should expect that the signs are pointing that the Russian strength in heavy weaponry is going down. That they definitely lose more that they can than what they can produce and what they can restore. There are also there's a video from mobilized personnel that asked to be transferred to Wagner because they are being treated so badly. There's rumors this is probably like staged to help Prigozhin open up new. And this seems actually the most likely that this is kind of staged, especially as we heard that Prigozhin, that Wagner was known for his high losses in frontal assaults. That regular mobilized personnel wants to be sent to Wagner seems fairly unlikely. So it's likely that we are talking about a PR stunt here, a staged video to open up new recruitment for Prigozhin, for Wagner, which was his recruitment was more or less cut off by the Russian Ministry of Defense under the efforts to consolidate control over the Russian armed forces. Also, right now there is an article in the Economist here that we can see here about the mobilization running into troubles in Ukraine. Not really much of a surprise here. The pro-Russian accounts lately start publishing videos and claiming there are thousands of videos of Ukrainians being dragged away. They claim that Ukraine is now down to 70-year-olds and 14-year-olds to have to fight. I'm exaggerating a little, but actually only a little here. So basically, the pro-Russian accounts are claiming that Ukraine is already running out of men, even though the potential for recruitment should be somewhat around 4 million, while the Ukrainian armed forces have likely not even reached 1 million as of this point. Generally, when we come to the article, it says some examples that there are some issues, obviously, and this shouldn't be surprising. Too much of a surprise. Obviously, there was a huge wave of volunteers at the beginning of the war. All of you will have seen those videos and those pictures, but at some point, all the volunteers that have volunteered up have been recruited, and if more personnel is needed, then you need to knock on somebody's door who hasn't raised the hand at the very first moment. And that among those, there will be some that are unhappy with the fact that they have to face going to war in a conscription. Nobody is happy. It's not nobody is happy, but I mean, it's not everyone that's happy, and not everyone is happy with the fate, especially when he knows that the loss rate will likely be significant enough that his chance of dying is an actuality. So it's an actual possibility in this war that you will face. And see a couple of videos of somebody being dragged away, of somebody shouting, of somebody filming and screaming. Shouldn't be too much of a surprise. I've watched a couple of those videos. A few seem to be staged, but only a few others are without context. So they could be in any context. That doesn't necessarily mean they have to be recruiters, but that even if we take out suspicious videos, that there will be a handful or a couple of videos of people complaining, of people not wanting to join the armed forces, should not surprise anyone at all. when tens of thousands are likely being called up every month to find 50 videos there of out of tens of thousands, isn't such a dramatic thing in total, and it should not be seen as an indication that Ukraine's morale is about to fail and that Ukraine is actually running out of men. Also, the article mentions corruption, obviously not much of a surprise here. That happens in the best of countries, but Ukraine has a corruption problem that is well acknowledged, and that there will be some military doctors that for a bribe write that you're incapable of serving, that there are some, they may also mention like fake marriages. If you marry a woman who has 3 children, then you won't be drafted because you need to take care of the children. So all you need to do is find a woman with 3 children and marry her and pay her off to do that. These things are happening, should not be too much of a surprise. And I said, in total, it's happening. It makes perfect sense that it happens. We see that from other countries and other societies as well. It's when in times of war losses are piling up, the volunteers are gone at some point, then the draft begins, and among those draftees, not everyone's happy. As said, in regards to morale, it should not be overinterpreted. It's the brutal reality of war that people don't want to die. And despite all patriotism, if it's up to you being called up, a few will always be unhappy. And if we're now talking about this for 5 to 10 minutes probably, and at the same time, we shouldn't forget that Russia had probably 1 million men fleeing the country by now. The last official number was 700,000, just 700,000 men of fighting age fleeing the country just after the induction of the draft, while several hundred thousands Russians have left before, among those many that were in fighting age as well. So while Ukraine might have a few videos of people complaining, in Russia hundreds of thousands are fleeing not to have to fight. So this is a problem that's facing both sides, and when all the metrics we have about morale, it's still vastly in favor of the Ukrainians. When it comes to the political sphere, we have some developments that are continuing during the last week. Since his speech on the 21st, Putin is increasingly turning this war in the public perception to in the regards towards a war for Russia's existence. So he's claiming that this war is about Russia's existence. He claims that the West has plans to disassemble, to take Russia apart, and the rests of Russia that are being left after those plans that are actually in existence, according to him. So it's not some theoretical ideas, but according to him, there are drafted plans for that, and the rest is supposed to be under the control of the West. He claimed that because of that, he had to suspend the START agreement, so strategic arms reduction treaty about nuclear weapons, to allow Russia to do the necessary measures to defend itself. And all of this indicates that a solution in negotiation is impossible as of now, that there is no chance of actually being able to find a negotiated solution at this very moment. With this rhetoric, he clearly wants to mobilize the country if they feel they might be unhappy with the war. But if they start to believe that the West wants to dismember them, then it's much more easy to accept the fate to fight a war which is then basically forced upon you, and it's a fight for your pure existence. And obviously it also is aimed towards the West, as by making the war bigger, by turning it into something more serious, it means that Russia is less likely to give in, which means that helping Ukraine might feel more futile, and at the same time, a fight for your existence will at some point also justify the use of nuclear weapons. So it's an implied nuclear threat at the same time. With this rhetoric, he's making sure that victory will be the only option that is left in this regard, but at the same time, he also is kind of binding his fate to the war. The claims from the Russian side that they are open for negotiations while this is happening are obviously meant to distract. They are meant to distract both domestically, that if the West was willing to, Russia would negotiate, and whenever these negotiation offers are not responded to, the Russian government has the proof that the West wants it bad, wants a bad fate for Russia, and at the same time, if those in the West, people like the people demonstrating in various countries, among them Germany, for peace in Ukraine, to stop weapon deliveries, to allow for peace. They are being told that Russia wants peace, but the West doesn't want to. But what it doesn't say in this regard is what is usually coming with these peace offers, that is that the reality on the ground has to be accepted. So Russia is saying we want peace, but you have to accept the reality on the ground. And the reality on the ground, according to Russia, is that Kherson, Crimea, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Luhansk have decided they want to be a part of Russia. So any negotiation has to start with the acceptance of a Ukrainian loss of those 5 oblasts. Peskov at the same time was also recently again talking about peace and potential, and he emphasized that the denazification and the demilitarization are still essential and are still not up for negotiation. So Russia still wants a regime change towards a pro-Russian government in Kiev, and they still want to demilitarize Ukraine, meaning that a Ukraine after a peace deal should no longer be able to defend itself in case Russia feels the need to invade it again. Ukraine has now published numbers, what they consider the number of children being deported into Russia. We were talking about this in the past here too, that Russia is also, that there are clear indications and even public acknowledgements about adoptions of Ukrainian children by Russians. Ukraine is now saying that 16,000 children have been deported into Russia, and Ukraine has identified 109 persons that were involved in this and has sanctioned them. The sanctions will probably be without relevance, but them being identified might help future prosecution. When it comes to the international support, we have some interesting news. First of all, Rheinmetall is providing Ukraine with a surveillance system. Now this is with a mast that can be raised here, as you can see here, and will help Ukraine to surveil areas where less troop presence is needed, but surveillance is still needed. So this is probably a system that would be of huge use along especially Transnistria to prevent infiltrations here, and maybe in parts of Belarusia, especially in the swamps, for instance. You need to make sure that there are no special forces infiltrating there. But at the same time, if you send enough to stop those forces, then you waste a lot of troops, because no serious invasion will come through the Pripyat marshes. By putting up surveillance masts like this, Ukraine will know if there is any advance from the Russians in this area, and they can respond to that. Also, in a podcast, the head of Rheinmetall, the CEO, Paperger, has said Skynex and Skyranger are in Ukraine. We are talking about the prototypes here from everything we see, and they are both being sent to Ukraine, and they are capable enough to defend a city like Berlin. We see it here. It can either be mounted on a truck, or it can be mounted on a pallet, or on something that can be put on trucks in other regards. It's a 35 millimeter air defense system with airburst ammunition, like the most modern cannon-based air defense system in the world, likely by now. And this is another version. This should be the Skyranger, and it is here on a Boxer chassis, so highly mobile as well. And obviously with Boxer being a fairly well-armored IFV or APC in this regard, probably IFV if you see it, and the gun being of 35 millimeter, it could be used in ground combat as well, but in this regard it seems likely it's just being used to defend Ukraine against cruise missiles and those Iranian Shahed 136 drones. That's it from me for now. What do you think? Leave your comments in the comment section whether you think how long Bakhmut will be able to hold on, and what do you think about the Russian tank production. What do you think when Russia will run out of tanks? If you like this video, leave a thumbs up. And this channel is only possible because of the support from viewers like you. So if you like what you see and you want to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting the channel. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, and recommend the channel to your friends and acquaintances to help it grow. That's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.